Defendant Timothy Eugene Rankine not guilty of the lesser included crime of manslaughter in the second degree.
5 months after that not guilty verdict was read for Rankine and two other former officers, he has filed a $47 million claim against the city of Tacoma and Washington Attorney General Bob Ferguson, alleging defamation and racial discrimination. Ellis, a 33-year-old black man, died in police custody in March of 2020 after he was beaten by officers, hogtied, and struck with a taser. It was later determined that Ellis died from oxygen deprivation due to the, quote, constellation of restraint methods used against him by police. Timothy Rankine resigned from the Tacoma Police Department after the trial. He received $500,000 and was said to be, quote, in good standing. Joining us is former Pierce County prosecuting attorney Mark Lindquist, also a King 5 legal analyst during that trial. Thanks so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Oh, thanks, Joyce.
First, what do you make of the claim? The charge, and I want to quote here, was politically motivated, false, and incited hatred, threats, and violence against Officer Rankine and his family.
In a criminal trial or a civil case, what matters is the evidence, not the motives. In other words, if a prosecutor, or in this case the Attorney General, brings criminal charges because he thinks that's the will of the people, that's what the people want, you may call that political, but that's within the prosecutor's discretion, as long as there's evidence to support those charges.
The charges in this case were brought by the AG's office, but it was after the judge found probable cause, and that actually matters. Tell us why.
Right. The judge found probable cause to file the charges. Additionally, the judge could have tossed the case, that is, dismissed it, at the very beginning on a motion from the defense, and then at halftime, in the middle of the trial, the judge could have dismissed the case. The judge chose to let this case go all the way to the jury, which seems to go along with what the Attorney General said, which is this is a case for the community to decide.
And there's immunity on the part of the Attorney General.
Correct. Prosecutors have absolute immunity in the bringing of criminal charges. Otherwise, they'd be getting sued all the time. I mean, they get sued all the time as it is, but they'd be getting sued
every
more.
time they bring charges.
Exactly, yes, right.
And then let's talk about the acquittal, because the three officers were acquitted. But that does not say that the officers are innocent.
Yeah, that's an important point, Joyce, because when a jury says not guilty, what they're saying is the prosecution has failed to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. The judge instructs the jury on that over and over. The burden is on the prosecution to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. Not guilty means that did not happen. Not guilty does not mean the defendant is innocent. Not guilty does not mean the defendant did everything right. Not guilty just means the prosecutor didn't prove their case.
I'm so glad that you said that so very clearly, because it certainly, one, does not mean that a person is innocent. Okay, so when you look at the claim in its entirety, how it was written, what it alleges, does it have any merit in your opinion?
No, not in its current form. This is essentially a political complaint which calls for a political solution. There aren't legal issues here calling for a legal remedy, at least not in its current form.
So in your mind, how do you explain that the complaint was even brought? I mean, there is some empathy, of course, toward the family because it was a difficult case for everyone involved, correct? So how do you explain why they would bring this kind of complaint?
You know, for example, Officer Rankine's wife has joined the lawsuit, and I'm sure this was very difficult for her, and I do have empathy for her. But that doesn't mean that there's a basis here for a lawsuit. An acquittal is not a license for a lawsuit. Sometimes, as you know, President Lincoln said, sometimes you have to discourage litigation and just get on with your life.
And before the officers were charged, there were some public officials that may have said some things that could have been perceived as defamatory, but there's a statute of limitations even on that.
Yeah, that's correct. Most of the inflammatory statements I suspect you're thinking of and I'm thinking of happened in 2020. And
right after.
Correct, right after the incident, and the statute of limitations has run, and you can't sue somebody for something that was said 4 years ago.
So there you have it. Interesting. Interesting case, still. Interesting claims. We so appreciate you, Mr. Lindquist, for being here always.
Anytime.
And in person. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
your analysis and insight into this. Appreciate it.